Of all characters in contemporary fiction, perhaps none have been more influential than Sherlock Holmes, the antisocial, robotic, but extremely intelligent detective, whose deductive reasoning abilities are very good at capturing killers, but his unwillingness to engage in the most basic of social interactions make him an outcast. When writing characters for the first time, it's very normal to focus on all of the qualities that make them special or unique, all of their talents and skills, all of the things that they do well, or all of their admirable qualities. But equally important to a character are their negative qualities, their flaws, their quirks, all of the things they do or believe that have a negative impact on their life. A common mistake novice writers make is in creating characters that don't have any notable flaws. But the solution to this problem isn't as simple as just pointing out all of your character's negative qualities, because that's not the same as having flawed characters. And that's because negative character traits aren't necessarily flaws, and what's a flaw for one character might not count as a flaw for another character, because flaws aren't an inherent quality of a character, they're in the way a story deals with a character's negative qualities. They're on the consequences that that negative trait has for that character. And so generally speaking, negative character traits can fall under two categories. They're either quirks or they're flaws. Most of a character's neutral and negative character traits would count as quirks. They're things about that character that don't necessarily help them accomplish their goals, but don't really hinder them in accomplishing them either. A character who is deathly afraid of dogs isn't going to have their life's goals be destroyed by the fact that there's a dog standing in front of the bank that they need to rob. But there are many negative character traits that could be a flaw. You could have characters who act on the first idea that comes in their head without stopping to think if it's a good idea or not. You could have characters who don't trust anyone to do the job other than themselves. They're the only person who could possibly succeed. Both of these traits could be character flaws, but a character having these traits doesn't mean that they're flawed. The difference between a character trait being a quirk or a character flaw are in whether or not that trait is consequential, whether that trait is responsible for them failing to do something. The character can't be considered flawed simply because they have negative traits. Those negative traits have to lead to negative outcomes in order for that to be a character flaw. Simply being stubborn and not willing to listen to advice doesn't count as a flaw if that trait is the reason why you succeed in the end. The best example to explore this difference between a character's quirk and a flaw lies in the character of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes was by no means the first detective character ever written, but he was the most popular, and as a result the Sherlock Holmes novels and the character came to typify the detective genre. From Nancy Drew to The Mentalist, it's easy to see how Sherlock Holmes has influenced the detective genre. But I want to focus more on the retellings of the Sherlock Holmes stories, both the explicit Sherlock Holmes ones like Elementary or BBC Sherlock, and the ones that are inspired by it like The Mentalist or Psych. Each of these shows is a retelling of the Sherlock Holmes narratives, each of them having their own twist associated with it that makes it slightly different from the classic Sherlock Holmes novels. Each of these stories has their Sherlock Holmes characters, the extremely intelligent detective with extraordinary deductive capabilities that help solve crimes. These characters will have strange quirks that make their suspects open their eyes wide and look around, not sure what's going on, but in the end they find the last piece of the puzzle that allows them to solve the mystery. But the big difference between these stories and classic Sherlock is that these main characters aren't flawed. Although they have a lot of quirks and negative traits, they're often stubborn, they have problems with authority, and they don't play along well with others. Those traits don't lead to negative consequences. They don't impede their ability to solve their mysteries. Classic Sherlock is shown as having a lot of gaps in his knowledge, especially when it concerns things that he thinks aren't that useful, like literature or politics. Classic Sherlock's addiction to cocaine is presented as very concerning from his friend Watson, and his inability to work with others and his overconfidence in his own abilities occasionally led to him being wrong about a case. These traits of Sherlock Holmes are all things that got weakened and watered down by our constant reimagining of Sherlock Holmes as this amazing detective character. And we've remembered him more for his intellect and his deductive reasoning than as him as a whole character, which, if you remember, is exactly the same problem that novice writers tend to have. You can't simply present a character for their good qualities, they also need to have their bad qualities. And more important than that, when you bring those bad qualities, you also have to bring with them bad consequences, because simply giving a character bad qualities doesn't amount to anything if they never actually lead to bad outcomes. Because that's what makes characters real. That's what makes stories impactful. The possibility of failure is essential for any story. That's why people so fiercely shield themselves from spoilers. Because our engagement with the story is changed irrevocably when we know the protagonist will succeed in the end, when we know that their quirks won't get in the way of their ultimate success. You don't want to give your readers absolute confidence that your protagonist will win. There has to be the chance that their negative qualities will get the better of them, that the villains might succeed in the end, that maybe things won't work out perfectly or in the protagonist's favor. That capacity to fail is an essential part of storytelling, and giving your characters flaws is a way to remind the audience that these people are not infallible. They might actually fail to do what they're trying to do, even if what they're doing is right and a good idea.